President Obama is suggesting that these terrorists will win out if we don't take refugees in.
These attacks can foment fear and division. They can tempt us to cast out the stranger, strike out against those who don't look like us, or pray exactly as we do. And they can lead us to turn our backs on those who are most in need of help and refuge. That's the intent of the terrorists.
To Democratic strategist Julie Rajensky, who agrees with the president, and former Army helicopter pilot Amber Smith, who thinks we need to put a pause on this refugee program. Amber?
So President Obama's refugee strategy and policy has been to basically treat the symptom of the problem instead of going after the root cause of the problem that exists in Iraq and Syria. And so doing so when he is wanting to bring in over 10,000 Syrian refugees into the United States, that is contributing to the problem, that's turning a blind eye to what needs to happen to solve this problem, and instead saying we're just going to contribute and not allow these people to have a place to go home to that is safe, and instead of being the leader and saying, look, we need to go after this problem and fix it where it lies, which is Iraq and Syria. As long as there's a civil war in Syria, as long as ISIS exists, they're not going to have a place to go home to.
So Amber, you're essentially saying two things. He's got to crush. We've got to decisively win the military war against ISIS in the places they control, and then secondly, allow these people to go home or stop them from coming here. This way they can rebuild their nation.
Yeah, absolutely. And not acknowledging that we truly need to go after ISIS is absolutely naive. And unfortunately, right. President Obama isn't learning from the crisis that's going on in Europe right now.
To that point, Germany has allowed a couple million in. We see the crisis in Europe is getting worse, it's spreading, Julie. I mean, there's got to be something to the notion of pausing this thing.
Well, let's not confuse what's going on in Europe with what's going on in the United States. First of all, Europe is adjacent to where these refugees are coming from. They're walking from Syria, sometimes into Turkey, then onward into Greece, and then into the European Union as a result. Nobody's coming here on a raft. People are coming
These are refugees, though.
These are refugees.
They're
correct,
running from a war.
Correct, but let's not...
It's the same people, though, with the same philosophies.
Well, it's not the same people with the same philosophies. Some of them are, some of them aren't.
Is there a way of vetting out the
of course.
So you're saying somewhere we're vetting out, we're getting the good Syrians, refugees, and Europe is getting the bad.
No, what I'm saying to you is that Europe cannot control their flow right now. People are literally crushing borders to walk in there, literally walking there.
But Julie, with all due respect, let me just tell you, I don't think that's what we're talking about here. What we're saying is that in general, should we halt the program, period, until we can get a better assessment of the situation?
Listen, we have a good assessment. It takes 12 to 18 months for anybody who applies for a refugee program to come here. They're not coming here the next day after they apply. It's taking time to do that. Let me just say this. Listen, Charles, I'm a political refugee myself. I came from a country that was from the Soviet Union, in a huge Cold War. And to Amber's point, we never thought we were going home. Now, what if people had said, don't let them come here, right. Let's solve communism first, and then let them come here? I mean, give me a break. I'd still be dying in Russia today if that were the case.
But would you, I don't know if I would compare Russian Jews to radical Islamic terrorists embedded among refugees.
How do you know that? Excuse me, wait, let me answer that for a second. How do you know that radical communists were not embedded among us? How do you know that? There was a fear, and I remember that so clearly in 1980, that people were terrified that, in fact, people that were coming here from the Soviet Union were communist infiltrators. So you can't make a comparison.
President Obama wants to allow over 10,000 Syrian refugees into the United States by the end of the fiscal year, this fiscal year. It takes over 2 years to properly vet refugees, which means they are going to be creating all sorts of waivers for these refugees to come into the United States. Even the FBI director has testified on Capitol Hill saying there is no
Ladies,
proper
let me ask you both about this notion, that President Obama keeps saying that is, if we take them in, it will mitigate or sort of lessen the appeal of terrorism and ISIS. I mean, Europe has taken them in, and we saw what happened in Brussels last week. We saw what happened in Paris. I mean, so taking them in, how is that sort of notion that if we love them and embrace them, keeping us safer?
Look at Paris is a very good. I'm glad you brought up Paris, because if you look at the people in Paris that were involved in this, the vast majority, if not all of them, and not all have been identified, were French-born nationals or European-born nationals. These were not refugees that were coming from Syria or Iraq. They were people who
One
were born.
was in
There were
Paris.
people who were born. One was. Most of them were not. So this was somebody who was born. Most of these people were born in Paris,
Right.
or they were born in Belgium. That's what you have to look
Terrorists
at.
don't hate us because we're not nice to them. They hate us because we are Americans, and they are going to take advantage of any program that we have to exploit our weaknesses and to bring foreign fighters into this nation
guys.
to have terrorist attacks against this country.
We got to leave it there. Thanks both
Thanks,
really
Charles.
very much.